I kept the job for 11 years, and in all that time, I never once saw the ocean. That is the part people never understood when I tried, in the early days, to explain what I did for a living. A lighthouse keeper, I would say, and they would picture the obvious thing: cliffs, salt on the wind, a beam sweeping across black water. They would ask if I got lonely out there on the coast, and I would nod, because the honest answer was too long and too strange, and because by then I had already learned that the people who ran the lighthouse did not want me correcting anyone. The tower stood in a wheat field in the middle of the country, no ocean for 900 miles in any direction. It was white, 68 feet tall, with a black iron cap and a lantern room that still held a working third-order Fresnel lens, the kind that belonged on a rocky headland in Maine or Oregon, not surrounded by corn and soybeans and the low hum of cicadas. There was a keeper's cottage at the base, 2 rooms and a kitchen, and a gravel road that ran out from it for about a mile before it met the county highway. There were no ships. There was no water, unless you counted the irrigation ditch that cut across the south edge of the property, and that ditch was rarely more than ankle deep. And every night, from sunset to sunrise, the light turned. I'm going to tell this the way I remember it, which is not always the way it happened. I have had time to think about the order of things, and some of the order has come apart. The doctor I saw after I left the job told me that was normal, that memory folds under sustained stress, and he prescribed pills I still take. He was a kind man. He was also wrong about what had happened to me, but I did not correct him, because by then I had already learned there is no point correcting people about the lighthouse. I was 26 when I took the job. I had been drifting for 4 years after my sister died, working warehouses and night shift gas stations, and once, briefly, a call center where I was supposed to convince people to refinance mortgages they already could not afford. I was not well. I was not unwell enough to be hospitalized, but I was the kind of unwell where you stop answering your mother's phone calls because the sound of her voice reminds you that there used to be 2 of you, and now there is only 1. And she will never say it, but you can hear her counting. My sister's name was Elise. She was 2 years younger than me. She drowned in a reservoir during a summer trip with her college friends, and the official report said she had been drinking, and the unofficial report, the one I got from the boy who had been with her, said she had swum out towards something she thought she saw in the water, and when he called her back, she had not turned around. He told me that on the porch of my mother's house, the week of the funeral. He was crying. I was not. I remember thinking very clearly that I would never forgive him for being the last person she had spoken to, and then I remember realizing that was unfair, and then I remember not caring that it was unfair. I say all this because it matters. The lighthouse chose people like me. I did not know that when I applied. The listing was on a government job site, buried under pages of Park Service and postal positions. Lighthouse Keeper, Inland Station, Unit 9. The salary was modest, but livable. Housing was provided. The description said the position required a candidate comfortable with isolation, routine, and discretion. There was a phone number, no email. I called it from the parking lot of a Waffle House at 2 in the morning, mostly because I was bored, and a woman with a flat, patient voice asked me 3 questions. Had I ever been married? Did I have any living siblings? Was I currently in contact with my immediate family? I said no to all 3. The first was true. The second was true in the way she meant it. The third I lied about, a little, but not in a way I thought mattered. She told me someone would be in touch, and 2 weeks later, A man in a gray suit met me at a diner off Interstate 70 and handed me a folder. The folder contained a map, a set of keys, a printed manual, and a check for my first month's pay, already cut. He did not give me his name. He told me to be at the station by the end of the week, and he told me, in a tone that was almost apologetic, that the work was simpler than it looked, and that most keepers stayed between 3 and 12 years, and that I was not to speak to anyone in the nearest town about the nature of the job. I asked him what the nature of the job was. He smiled at that. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of a man who has given the same answer many times and found that the answer never quite helps. You light the lamp at sunset, he said. You extinguish it at sunrise. You log the weather. You do not enter the lantern room between those hours. That is the entire job. I asked him what the light was for. He paid the bill and stood up and said, "It's for what the light is for," and left. I drove out the next morning. The station sat on about 40 acres of leased farmland, the wheat running right up to a gravel apron around the tower. The cottage was small but clean, recently painted. There was a landline phone, a radio, a television that only picked up 2 channels, and a kitchen stocked with enough canned food for 3 months. The previous keeper had left a note on the refrigerator that said, in small, careful handwriting, "Keep the log accurate. Do not answer the door after the light is lit." The kettle whistles. Good luck. The note was not signed. I should have found that strange. I did find it strange. But I was 26, and I was tired, and the cottage was warm, and the wheat outside moved in long, slow waves that reminded me of something I could not place. And for the first time in 4 years, I felt like I had arrived somewhere instead of fleeing somewhere. The manual was 40 pages long. Most of it was practical. How to operate the lamp, how to clean the lens, how to maintain the generator, how to fill out the daily log. The log was a green cloth-bound book, the kind you find in old county offices. It had columns for date, weather, wind direction, visibility, lamp condition, and observations. The observations column was narrow. The previous keepers, going back decades, had usually written only a word or two: clear, fog, still, quiet. Occasionally there was something longer. A woman in 1978 had written in the observations column for July 14th, 2 figures in the south field at 3:40 a.m. did not approach. Light held. A man in 1991 had written October 2nd, knocking at door, 2:17 a.m. to 4:05 a.m., did not answer. Knocking stopped at sunrise. A man in 2003 had written April 19th. She spoke my mother's name. I did not respond. I read those entries the first night and told myself they were jokes, the kind of thing a bored keeper writes to spook the next one. I lit the lamp at 7:42 p.m., logged the weather as clear with a light westerly wind, and sat in the kitchen eating a can of chili while the great slow beam of the Fresnel lens turned above me, throwing its long white arm out over the wheat and the empty road and the dark line of trees beyond. The first week was uneventful. The second week was uneventful. By the third week, I had settled into a rhythm. I woke at dawn, extinguished the lamp, logged the night, slept until noon, did maintenance, drove into town once a week for groceries and mail, and returned before dusk to light the lamp again. The town was called Hadley. It was 12 miles east. It had a single stoplight, a grocery store, a hardware store, a diner, and a small brick library where the librarian, a woman in her 60s named Marion, checked me out books without asking what I did for a living. She knew. Everyone in Hadley knew. No one asked. The first wrong thing happened in my second month. I had finished my shift, extinguished the lamp, and was making coffee in the kitchen when I noticed that the screen door to the cottage was unlatched. I had latched it the night before. I always latched it. I checked the porch, checked the gravel, checked the wheat. Nothing. I told myself the wind had done it, although there had been no wind. I latched the door again and forgot about it. 2 nights later, I heard footsteps on the gravel outside the cottage. It was about 1 in the morning. The lamp was turning. I was reading in the kitchen, a paperback I had borrowed from Marion, something about a man who inherited a house in Scotland. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, coming from the direction of the tower. They circled the cottage once and stopped at the porch. I set the book down. I did not go to the window. The manual had been very clear. Do not answer the door after the light is lit. I had laughed at that line the first time I read it. I was not laughing now. The footsteps stayed on the porch for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 or 5 minutes. Then they moved away, back around the cottage, back toward the tower, back into the wheat. I sat very still. When I finally stood up and looked out the window, there was no one there. The wheat was moving the way wheat moves at night, which is to say, almost not at all, and the beam was turning, and the road was empty. I wrote in the observation column, footsteps on porch, 1:14 a.m. Did not answer, and that, I think, is when the lighthouse began to know my name. I want to be careful here, because this is the part people doubt, and I do not blame them. If someone had told me this story before I lived it, I would have doubted it too, so I will tell it plainly. I will not exaggerate. I will tell you what I saw, and what I heard, and what I did, and you can decide for yourself what it means. The footsteps came back the next night, and the night after that, always between 1 and 3 in the morning, always circling the cottage, always pausing on the porch, always leaving before sunrise. I never opened the door. I stopped reading at the kitchen table. I moved to the inner room, the one without windows, and I read there instead. On the 4th night, the footsteps stopped. For almost a minute, there was nothing. Then the knocking started. It was not loud. It was the knock of someone who knew you were home and did not want to startle you. 3 slow taps, a pause, 3 more. I stayed in the inner room. The knocking went on for about an hour and then stopped. On the 5th night, a voice said, through the door, "Daniel, it's me. Open up. I've been driving all day." My name is Daniel. I had not told anyone in Hadley my name. I had not told the man in the gray suit my first name, only my last. The woman on the phone had my name, of course, and whoever paid my salary had my name. But no one in that field, in that wheat, in that dark, should have had my name. And the voice was my sister's. I want to say I did not believe it. I want to say I knew immediately that it was a trick, a lure, a thing wearing her mouth. But I did not know that, not at first. What I felt, sitting on the floor of the inner room with my back against the wall, was something worse than fear. It was hope. It was the specific, sickening hope of a person who has spent 4 years imagining that the phone call was a mistake, that the body in the reservoir was someone else, that his sister had walked out of the water somewhere downstream and lost her memory, and was living a small, quiet life in a town she could not name, and that one day she would find her way home. The voice said, "Daniel, please, I'm so tired." I put my hands over my ears. I did not move. I stayed on the floor until the sun came up, and the voice went away, and the beam above me stopped turning. And then I went outside and stood on the porch and looked at the gravel, and there were no footprints. None. Not mine from the day before, not anyone's. The gravel was smooth, as if someone had raked it in the night. I did not write that entry in the log. I could not make my hand form the words. I wrote instead, quiet. Wind light from the north, all systems normal. And I closed the book and I drove into town. And I sat in Marion's library for 6 hours, not reading, just sitting, because the library had fluorescent lights and other people and a radiator that clanked. And those things felt like proof of something I needed proof of. Marion came over at some point and sat down across from me. She was holding a mug of tea. She set it in front of me without asking. "First time they called you by name?" she said. I looked at her. I did not know what to say. "It gets harder," she said. "Not easier, harder. I want you to know that now so you can decide." I asked her how she knew. She said, "My husband had the job before you, not the keeper before you, 4 keepers before you. He did 8 years. He came home one morning and he could not remember our son's face. He could describe him, he could name him, he could tell you his birthday. But when our son walked into the room, my husband looked at him like a stranger. He died 2 years later. The doctors called it early dementia. I called it the Lighthouse." I asked her why she was telling me this. She said, "Because you still have time. Some of them don't by the time they figure it out. You still do." I asked her what the light was for. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "I don't know. I don't think anyone alive knows. But I know what it does. It brings things close. It holds them at the edge of the field. And the keeper is the thing that keeps them from coming any closer. That's all I know. That's all he ever told me." I said, "So the light is a warning?" She shook her head. "No, the light is a leash." I drove back to the station that evening with my hands tight on the wheel. The sun was low. The wheat looked gold and unbearable. I lit the lamp at 7:29 p.m. I logged the weather. I sat in the inner room, and I did not read, and I did not sleep. And at 1:47 a.m. the footsteps came, and at 2:10 a.m. the knocking began. And at 2:34 a.m. my sister's voice said, through the door, "Daniel, I found your address. I came all this way. Please." I did not answer. The voice said, "I know about the reservoir. I know what you think happened. It didn't happen the way they told you. Open the door and I'll tell you." I did not answer. The voice said, quieter, the way she used to speak when we were children, and she wanted to tell me a secret. "I'm cold, Danny. I'm so cold." No one had called me Danny since she died. My mother called me Daniel. My father, when he was alive, had called me son. Elise was the only person in the world who had ever called me Danny, and she had said it exactly like that, exactly in that register, exactly with that small, tired lilt at the end. I stood up. I walked to the door. I put my hand on the latch. And then I thought of Marion's husband, looking at his son like a stranger, and I took my hand off the latch, and I went back to the inner room, and I sat down, and I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, and I did not speak, and I did not open the door, and eventually the voice stopped, and eventually the sun came up. I wrote in the log, "She spoke my name." I did not respond. And then I understood the other entries, all of them. I understood that I was not the first, and I understood that the book in my hands was not a log. It was a confession. Each keeper, in their narrow, careful column, had been writing down the shape of what they had refused to let in. I stayed for almost 11 years. I want to try to explain what those years were like, because if I only tell you the frightening parts, it will sound like a story. And this was not a story. It was a life. Most of it was ordinary. I cooked, I read, I walked the edge of the wheat in the afternoons. I grew tomatoes behind the cottage. I played chess by mail with a man who thought I lived in a normal house on a normal road. I drove into Hadley once a week and sat in Marion's library, where sometimes we talked and sometimes we didn't. I got older. My hair started to gray at the temples. I put on weight, then lost it, then put it back on. And every night, from sunset to sunrise, I lit the lamp, and I did not answer the door. The voices changed over the years. That was the hardest part. It was not always Elise. Sometimes it was my mother, calling me from the porch in a tone I had not heard since I was a child, telling me dinner was ready. Sometimes it was my father, who had died when I was 19, asking if I had finished mowing the lawn. Once, for a whole week, it was a girl I had loved in college, whose name I had not said aloud in years, who stood at the door and cried and asked me why I had never written to her, why I had disappeared, why I had made her feel like she was the one who had done something wrong. That was the worst week. She had been real. She had loved me. I had left her because of Elise, because I could not be loved by anyone while my sister was at the bottom of that reservoir. And the thing at the door knew that, and it used it. I did not open the door. The thing is, after a while, the voices were not even the frightening part. The frightening part was how good they got, how they learned. In the first year, they sounded like recordings. By the third year, they sounded like the person. By the fifth year, they sounded like the person on a specific day, saying something that person might actually have said, referencing things only that person could have known. By the seventh year, they had started to anticipate me. They would stop speaking before I covered my ears. They would go silent when I was about to break. They would return in the morning in the wind, in the creak of the cottage, in the sound of my own breathing. One night after that, I saw myself outside. Not clearly, not at first, just a shape standing at the edge of the wheat, caught for 1 second in the sweep of the lamp. Same coat, same height, same bad posture. I waited for the beam to come around again. When it did, the shape was closer. It had my face, but not the memory of how to wear it. I began to forget things, small things at first. The name of the street I grew up on, the color of my mother's car, the words of a song Elise used to sing when she was washing dishes. I would reach for these things, and they would not be there, and I would panic, and then, later, I would reach again, and they would be back, or something like them would be back, close enough that I could not tell if I was remembering or inventing. I called my mother once, in the 7th year. I had not spoken to her in almost 4 years. She answered on the 3rd ring. I said, "Mom, it's Daniel." And there was a long silence, and then she said, "Daniel who?" I thought she was joking. She was not joking. She had a son named Daniel. She knew she had a son named Daniel, but she could not remember what he looked like, or what his voice sounded like, or when she had last seen him. She asked me to describe myself. I tried. She started crying. She said she was sorry. She was so sorry. She did not know what was wrong with her. She had been forgetting things lately. The doctor said it was stress. She did not know why she could not picture my face. I hung up. I sat in the kitchen for a long time. Then I walked out to the base of the tower, and I looked up at the lantern room, at the slow turning beam, and I said, out loud, to the lighthouse, "Give her back." Nothing answered. The beam kept turning. I drove to Hadley the next morning, and I told Marion what had happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "It eats outward, from the keeper. It takes from the people the keeper loves. That's how it pays for the leash." I asked her why no one had told me that. She said, "Would you have taken the job?" I said no. She said, "That's why." I asked her if there was a way to stop it, to give back what it had taken, to fix my mother. She said, "I don't know. I don't think so. My husband tried. He quit. He walked away from the tower and drove home, and 6 months later, he could not remember our son. Whatever it takes, it keeps, whether you stay or go." I asked her why she was still in Hadley, why she had not left. She said, "Because my husband is buried here, and because someone has to tell the new keepers. The people who pay for the light don't tell them. They used to. They don't anymore. Someone has to." I asked her who paid for the light. She said, "I don't know. I used to think it was the government. I don't think that anymore, and I think the government just lets it happen. I think they made an arrangement a long time ago, and they keep the arrangement because they're afraid of what happens if they don't." I asked her what happens if they don't. She said, "I think the light goes out, and I think whatever the light holds at the edge of the field walks the rest of the way in." I went back to the station. I lit the lamp. I did not answer the door. In the 11th year, a new keeper arrived. I had not been told to expect one. I had not applied to leave. I was sitting on the porch one afternoon, shelling peas from my garden, when a car came up the gravel road and a young woman got out. She was maybe 24. She had a duffel bag and a folder, the same kind of folder the man in the gray suit had given me 11 years before. She walked up to the porch and stood at the bottom of the steps and said, "I was told I would be training under the current keeper. Is that you?" I said yes. She said her name was Hannah. She smiled when she said it, but only because she thought she was supposed to. I recognized that smile. It was the smile of someone who had been hurt so often that politeness had become a survival instinct. She had grown up in foster care. She had no family. She had been drifting for a few years after a bad marriage. She had seen the listing on the government job site, and a woman with a flat, patient voice had asked her 3 questions, and she had answered no to all of them, and she had been given a check and a map and told to come here. I looked at her. I saw myself at 26. I saw Marion's husband. I saw the woman in 1978 who had written 2 figures in the south field. I saw every keeper who had ever sat where I was sitting and watched a new one walk up the gravel with a folder under their arm. And I understood, finally, how the lighthouse fed. Not just from the keeper, from the keeper's replacement, one after another, in a line that went back further than anyone alive could remember, each of them giving up the people they loved so the light could keep turning. I should have told her to leave. I should have taken the folder out of her hand and told her what Marion had told me, and I should have driven her back to the interstate and put her on a bus and let the light go out. I did not. I told myself I was going to. I told myself I was just going to let her stay one night, get some sleep, and in the morning I would tell her everything. I told myself I was being responsible, that it would be cruel to send her back into the dark after a day of driving, that I would explain in the morning. I made her dinner. I showed her the cottage. I told her where the spare blankets were. I did not show her the logbook. I did not tell her about the voices. At sunset, I went out and lit the lamp, and when I came back inside, she was asleep on the couch. And I stood in the doorway, looking at her for a long time, and I knew what I was doing, and I did it anyway. I was tired. That is the only explanation I have. I was tired in a way I did not have words for. A tiredness that had accumulated in me for 11 years, night after night after night, every knock and every voice and every forgotten name. And I saw in her a door I could walk through, a way out, a person who would take the next shift. I did not answer the door that night. I sat in the inner room with my hands on my knees. The voice at the door was Elise's. It had not been Elise's in almost a year. I do not know why she came back that night. Maybe the lighthouse knew. Maybe the lighthouse was congratulating me. She said, "Danny, you're doing the right thing. She'll be okay. They all are, for a while." I did not answer. She said, "I'm proud of you." That was the one that broke me. Not the pleading, not the crying, not the whispering of secrets only she could have known. Pride. The thing at the door knew that what I wanted, more than anything, was for Elise to be proud of me. And it gave that to me at the exact moment I had done the worst thing I would ever do. I went out onto the porch. I did not open the door. I climbed out the back window of the inner room, the one that did not face the tower, and I dropped down into the wheat, and I walked around the side of the cottage to the porch. The beam was turning above me. The voice had stopped. I do not know if that was because it had seen me or because it had finished its work. There was no one on the porch. The gravel was smooth. The night was very still. I stood there for a long time. Then I went back inside through the front door, and I sat on the floor next to the couch where Hannah was sleeping, and I watched her breathe, and I understood that I was going to leave in the morning, and that she was going to take the job, and that in 11 years or so, she would sit where I was sitting and watch someone else sleep, and the line would continue, and the light would keep turning. And somewhere, in a town I could not name, a woman who had loved me once would forget a little more of my face, and my mother would forget a little more, and everyone who had ever loved me would be emptied out a grain at a time to feed the thing in the field. In the morning, I told Hannah almost everything. I did not tell her about the voices. I could not make myself say that part. I told her about the lamp, and the log, and the door, and the rule about not answering after the light was lit. I told her that she would sometimes hear things outside at night, and that she must never, under any circumstances, open the door between sunset and sunrise. I told her the previous keepers had all followed this rule, and that was why they had survived. She asked me why I was leaving. I said I was tired. She asked me if I was all right. I said yes. She watched me pack my things into my truck. There was not much. 11 years of clothes, a box of books, the paperback Marion had lent me in the first month, which I had never returned. I thought about going to Hadley to say goodbye to Marion, and then I thought about what I would say, and I did not go. I drove east. I did not look at the tower in the rearview mirror. I did not want to see it getting smaller. I wanted it to already be gone. I drove to my mother's house. It took 9 hours. She lived in a small ranch house in a suburb of Indianapolis, the house I had grown up in, the house Elise had grown up in. My mother was 73. I had not seen her in almost 8 years. I had told myself every year that I would visit. I had not visited. She opened the door. She looked at me. She smiled politely, the way you smile at a stranger on a porch, and she said, "Can I help you?" I said, "Mom, it's Daniel." She said, "Daniel." She said it the way you say a word in a language you used to speak. She knew it. She could not place it. She looked past me, at the driveway, as if checking for someone else, as if the Daniel she was supposed to recognize might still be coming up the walk. I said, "Your son, Mom, Daniel, Elise's brother." She said, "Elise." She said that name the same way. She looked at me and her eyes filled with tears, not because she recognized me, but because she could see that I was someone who needed something from her that she could not give. She let me in. She made me coffee. She asked me, very kindly, how long I had known her family. She asked if I had been a friend of Elise's from school. She asked if I would like to see the photo album. She brought out the album. She turned the pages slowly. There were photographs of Elise as a child, Elise on a bicycle, Elise at a birthday party. There were photographs of my father. There were photographs of my mother, younger, holding a baby. There were no photographs of me. I want to be careful here. I do not mean that the photographs had been removed. I mean that they had never been there. I mean that the pictures that had included me, pictures I had looked at 100 times, pictures where I had been standing next to Elise at the beach, or holding the birthday cake, or sitting on my father's shoulders, had those spaces simply blank, as if the photographer had framed around me, as if I had been beside the frame instead of inside it. In one picture, I remembered clearly a Christmas morning when I was 8. Elise was holding up a stuffed bear and laughing at something. In the picture in the album, Elise was holding up the bear and laughing at empty air to her left. My mother turned the pages. She smiled fondly. She said, "She was such a happy girl." I closed the album. I said I had to go. My mother walked me to the door. On the porch, she touched my arm gently, and she said, "I'm so sorry. I know I should remember you. I've been forgetting so many things. Please don't take it personally." I said I wouldn't. I drove away. I pulled over at a rest stop about an hour later, and I sat in the truck, and I tried to cry, and I could not. I tried to picture Elise's face, and I could, but it was like looking at a photograph of a photograph. I tried to picture my own face at 8 years old, the Christmas morning with the bear, and I could not. There was a space where the memory should have been, and the space was smooth, the way the gravel on the porch had been smooth after the voices. I understood then what the Lighthouse had done. It had not just taken from the people who loved me. It had taken me out of them, and in taking me out of them, it had taken them out of me. The memories we had made together were shared objects, and the Lighthouse had simply reached in and lifted them out, and what was left on my side of the shared thing was the shape of my own presence, which could not survive without the other half. I would not be remembered by anyone. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I had stood between a light and a field for 11 years, and that had been the price, and I had paid it, and I had not known I was paying it, and now it was done. I checked into a motel. I stayed for 3 days. On the second day, I called Marion. She answered on the first ring. She said, "You left." I said, "Yes." She said, "Did you warn her?" I said I had told her about the door. I had not told her about the voices. Marion was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "That's what my husband did too, to the keeper after him. It's what they all do. You're not a bad man for doing it. You're just a tired one. The Lighthouse knows how to make people tired." I asked her if there was anything I could do. Anything at all, for my mother, for myself, for Hannah. She said, "You can call Hannah in a month. If she answers, tell her the truth, the whole truth. Some of them listen, most don't. But some do. And the ones who do, sometimes they walk away before the light takes too much." I asked her if anyone had ever walked away in time. She said, "One that I know of. A woman in the 60s. She quit after 3 weeks. She went home and her life was intact. She wrote me a letter years later, after my husband died. She said she still dreamed about the field. She said in the dream she was always almost remembering something, and almost was the worst word in the English language. I asked her what happened to the keeper after that woman. Marion said, "A young man. He stayed 14 years. His family forgot him completely. He walked into a river in Ohio the week after he left the job. They found his truck, but never his body." I did not say anything. Marion said, "I'm telling you this because you are going to be tempted. I am telling you, because I have seen this before. You are going to feel like there is no point, like you are already gone. You are not already gone. You still have yourself." The lighthouse did not take that. It cannot. That is the one thing it cannot take, no matter how long you stay. Your own mind, your own memory of yourself is yours. Hold it. Write it down if you have to, but hold it. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on the edge of the motel bed and I wrote on a piece of motel stationery, "My name is Daniel." I had a sister named Elise. She drowned in a reservoir when I was 22. I loved her. I loved my mother. I worked at a lighthouse in a field for 11 years. I did not open the door. I folded the paper and put it in my wallet. I have carried it for 2 years now. I take it out sometimes, in parking lots and diners and on the shoulders of highways. And I read it, and I remind myself that it is true. Some days it feels true. Some days it feels like I am reading a story about someone else. I called Hannah at the 1-month mark, the way Marion had told me to. She answered. She sounded tired. I told her the whole truth. I told her about the voices. I told her about my mother's photo album. I told her about Marion's husband. I told her she could leave, that it was not too late, that there was a woman in the 60s who had left in time and had been all right. Hannah was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I heard my daughter's voice last night." I did not know she had a daughter. She said, "I had a daughter. She died when she was 2. I never told anyone on the paperwork. The woman on the phone asked me if I had any living siblings. She didn't ask about children. I didn't lie." I said, "Hannah, leave tonight. Get in your car and leave." She said. She told me her name. I hadn't said it in 8 years. She told me what color her blanket was. No one knew that but me. She said she was waiting for me in the field. I said, "Hannah, please." She said, "I think I'm going to stay a while longer. I think she wants to talk to me. I think if I stay, she'll come closer." I said, "That is not your daughter." She said, "I know, but it is closer to her than anything I've had in 8 years. And I don't have anything else, Daniel. I don't have a mother whose photo album I can lose. I don't have anyone to forget me. I have already been forgotten. The lighthouse can't take anything from me it hasn't already taken." I did not know what to say. She said, "Thank you for calling. I mean that. But I think the lighthouse knew what it was doing when it picked me. I think it picks everyone for a reason. I think yours was that you still had something to lose. Mine is that I don't." She hung up. I have not called her since. I do not know if she is still there. I drive past the exit on I-70 sometimes, the one that leads to the county highway, that leads to the gravel road that leads to the cottage, and I do not take it. I tell myself I do not take it because there is nothing I can do. I tell myself Hannah made her choice. I tell myself Marion is there, and Marion will watch over her, the way Marion watched over me. But I know the truth. The truth is, I am afraid to go back. I am afraid that if I stand at the base of the tower again and look up at the lantern room and feel the slow turn of the beam across my face, I will understand that the lighthouse has not finished with me. That the pact I made when I walked away was not a severance, but a pause. That one day, when I am old, I will hear my sister's voice on a street corner, or in a supermarket, or through the wall of whatever small apartment I am living in by then, and she will say, "Danny, come home," and I will go. Because here is the thing Marion did not tell me, the thing I worked out for myself in the 2 years since I left. I used to think the strangest thing about the lighthouse was that it stood 900 miles from the sea. I understand now that it was never built to guide ships. It was built to teach something how to wait. The lighthouse does not hold the dark at the edge of the field. The lighthouse is the dark at the edge of the field. It was built by whoever built it, not to keep the thing out, but to give the thing a shape, a schedule, a door it could stand behind. The keeper is not a guard. The keeper is a gift. 11 years at a time, or 8, or 14. Each of us offering up our mothers and our lovers and the photographs we were supposed to be in. And in exchange, the thing agrees to stay at the door, to ask before it enters, to accept the answer, no, for now. I keep a single photograph in my wallet behind the folded motel stationery. It is a picture of Elise, age 19, taken the summer before she died. She is standing on the porch of our mother's house, squinting into the sun, holding a glass of iced tea. The picture used to have me in it. I was standing to her right. I remember my hand on her shoulder. I remember the feeling of her t-shirt under my palm. I remember that I had just told her a joke and she was laughing. In the picture now, she is laughing at empty air. I look at it every night before I go to sleep. I do not know why. Maybe because it is proof. Maybe because it is the closest thing I have to a mirror. Maybe because some part of me believes that if I look at the empty space beside her long enough, I will begin to see myself there again, and the lighthouse will have to get me back. It has been 2 years. I have not seen myself yet. But last week, in the motel where I am currently staying, a town I will not name in a state I will not name, I was woken at 2:17 in the morning by a knock at the door. 3 slow taps. A pause. 3 more. I did not answer. I lay in the dark and I listened. And after a long time, a voice on the other side of the door said very quietly, in a tone I had not heard in 11 years, "Danny, I'm so cold." The knocking stopped at sunrise. I have not slept with the lights off since. And every evening now, at dusk, I find myself standing at the window of whatever room I am in, watching the sky go orange and then purple and then black. And I think about the lamp. And I think about Hannah climbing the spiral staircase in the tower. And I think about the great slow turn of the Fresnel lens throwing its long white arm out over the wheat. And I understand, the way you understand something you have always known, that somewhere in the middle of the country there is a light that is turning for me. And one night, when I am tired enough, I will answer the door, not because I believe it is Elise, because by then I will not care that it isn't.